This bill be now read a second time. I give the call to the member for Throsby.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. It's with great pleasure that I rise to speak on this matter, one that is a passion of mine, for reasons I'll set out in a moment. We also understand that industrial relations is a passion of those members of the government. However, it must be said that in this particular debate it's a private passion, a very private passion, because there's only been one member of the one member of the government has been willing to come to the chamber today and defend their legislation. Indeed, if there was a standing order, Deputy Speaker, that said a government bill had to have a minimum number of government speakers who are willing to stand and speak in defence of it, then I'm quite certain that this legislation wouldn't get out the gate. Deputy Speaker, legislation, the business that a government brings before the House, is a statement of its values and a statement of its priorities. And I'd like to address some of the priorities and the values that are resplendent within this legislation, because, as the member for Fowler has just told the House, we are debating this legislation in the very same week that one of the most important reports that goes to the heart of who is paying tax and who is not paying tax in this country was published. And readers of the Sydney Morning Herald woke with quite some alarm when they picked up the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald yesterday, and they saw that almost 1/3 of the nation's top 200 companies are paying less tax. In fact, they're paying less than 10 cents in the dollar, Deputy Speaker. And if you put end to end the amount of tax that has been evaded as a result of these deliberate decisions of some of the largest companies in the country, you would have an additional $80 billion in government revenue. And I ask you to think about that for a moment, Deputy Speaker, because we have a bill before the House today which finds its genesis in the Commission of Audit. The massive beat-up by the government to try and alarm the population that there was somehow a budget emergency, and hidden within the report was the proposition to wind back the provisions within the Fair Entitlements Guarantee Act to a bare minimum because we have a budget emergency. Nowhere, Deputy Speaker, in the Commission of Audit did we find the Commissioners drawing the attention towards the tax avoidance and the tax evasion, which has led to over $80 billion not finding its way into government coffers, not finding its way out of those coffers again into important public spending programs, road, infrastructure, education, hospitals, and important employee protection scheme, such as those before the House today, Deputy Speaker. So I again make the point that the legislation before the House today is a statement of values, and priorities, and instead of pursuing measures which would help the government buttress the problem that we all know is the problem, Deputy Speaker, and that is a problem of revenue, they are going after basic entitlements. Now, Deputy Speaker, this matter is one that is very close to my heart because before coming into Parliament I spent more than a little bit of time working in the area of insolvency and helping workers to chase down their entitlements that had been lost once a business went into liquidation. More than a little bit of time on that, and in quite some high-profile matters indeed, Deputy Speaker. So it's an important scheme. It's one that I have more than a little bit of knowledge of, and I wish that those members opposite informed themselves a little bit more about the legislation that they're all going to be careered in here to vote in favour of without having read it, without having spoken in favour of it, because that might change their mind. Now, Deputy Speaker, we know that there are around about 7,000 businesses which fail every year. About half of those businesses cause their employees to lose entitlements such as long service leave, holiday and sick pay, and redundancy payments that provisions haven't been made for. And we know that there have been around 885 business-related bankruptcy cases in the June quarter alone. Total debtors exceeded 1,100 for the same period, and between 2001 and 2013, more than $260 million has been advanced under the FEG scheme and its antecedents, the GEAR scheme, to over 16,000 Australian workers. So it's an important scheme. It deserves to have more attention than the House is currently affording it today by the fact that only members of the opposition are speaking on the legislation. Deputy Speaker, the history of this scheme is well known to many. You may recall back in 2000, a company known as National Textiles, coincidentally a company that was owned and operated by the then Prime Minister John Howard's brother, Stan Howard, went into liquidation, owing around 340 employees accumulated entitlements, including redundancy pay. Now, this group of employees were amongst the lucky ones because they had 100%, I should say, Deputy Speaker, if anybody who was about to lose their job could be classified as lucky, here is a group of employees unfortunate enough to lose their jobs, but 100% of their entitlements were paid eventually, not by the business, but by the government moving in and underwriting the bills that were owed by the Prime Minister's brother. And many were saying at the time, many other employees who'd lost their jobs, if only we could have been so lucky as to have been working for a company that went bust and the owner of that company happened to be a Prime Minister's brother. Now, Deputy Speaker, wind the clock forward, 2001, a company by the name of OneTel. This time the collapse was not a relatively small textile company, but one of the, probably the fourth largest telecommunications company in the country at the time, stranding around about 2 million customers, but importantly, owing something in the vicinity of $600 million to over 3,000 creditors. Included within those creditors were the 1,400 employees of OneTel. Now, I know a lot about this because I was representing the employees at the time, Deputy Speaker, and I remember at that time writing to the then Minister for Workplace Relations, one Tony Abbott, and asking him to intercede on the behalf of the workers in a matter that I had before the then Australian Industrial Relations Commission to get some justice for these workers, and the then Minister for Workplace Relations refused to do that. Of course, a campaign then pursued, a campaign that was supported by the majority of Australians, right-thinking Australians, and the then Minister for Workplace Relations got rolled by the Prime Minister. And it was the only occasion in my working life as a lawyer, Deputy Speaker, practising in that particular practice where I could say I was standing on the same side of the bar table as a member representing a coalition Minister for Workplace Relations. But it became clear to all, Deputy Speaker, that a general scheme was needed, and as the Shadow Minister for Workplace Relations has explained, an administrative scheme was set up, known as the GEAR scheme, and it paid a minimum entitlement to workers in the event that their company went bust and provision had not been made for their accumulated entitlements. An important point to make, Deputy Speaker, was it's lost on many, that the payment of the minimum entitlements to the worker who has lost their job is not the end of the story. Because what happens is the right to pursue the assets of the company, the right to become a creditor of the company, is then assigned to the government. So the government, presumably through the auspices of the Tax Office or the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, is assigned the right to pursue those owed entitlements on behalf of, or instead of, the employer, Deputy Speaker, a matter that is lost on many. And when you're looking to provide a revenue stream, Deputy Speaker, and you're looking to address issues such as moral hazard, I would argue that this is an important place to start to look, putting more effort and more resources into the chasing of the assigned debt, Deputy Speaker. So the scheme has been operating. It was improved under the former Labor government to a point now where the FEG Act now sets out maximum entitlements and how they're to be calculated. They include up to 13 weeks of unpaid wages, annual leave that has been accrued but not paid, long service leave, a maximum 5 weeks payment in lieu of notice, and redundancy pay of 4 weeks per year of service. Now, it's important to make the point, Deputy Speaker, that these are not award or agreement rights themselves. These represent the caps or maximum entitlements that may be paid to an employee where they have been unable to recover those entitlements from a collapsed company. The wages were capped at a minimum weekly rate of $2,364 when the scheme began. It's been frozen at $2,451 until the 30th of June 2018. We have to ask yourself who's benefited from the scheme, Deputy Speaker. We know because the one courageous member who's been willing to stand up and defend the scheme, the member for Hume, put his hand up and said that at least 33 workers from the business National Engineering in his electorate benefited from the scheme. Now, I congratulate the member for Hume for having the courage to come in here and stand up and defend his government's legislation. I warrant you, Deputy Speaker, that he would not have the courage to have given that same speech prior to the last election. He wouldn't have been out there promising those 33 workers that if you vote for me, I can guarantee you that if your company goes bust, you'll get less money under my government than you will under a Labor government, Deputy Speaker. He wouldn't have given that speech. And I can also guarantee you, Deputy Speaker, that of all the people that the member for Hume mails out his courageous speech to today, he won't be mailing it out to the 33 workers who had their benefits paid under the existing FEG scheme, Deputy Speaker. I happen to know a bit about this company. It's been in existence for over 120 years. It's a metalworking company, a blacksmithing company, and I know, being a business, what was a reasonably good business in a country town, it was some of the best work going, and the people who got a job there, if they're a skilled tradesman, they hung onto that job and they were working there for a long, long time indeed, Deputy Speaker. So the member for Hume won't be mailing out his speech saying, if I had my chance, would have been cutting your rights to get your wages recovered, Deputy Speaker. Guarantee he wouldn't be doing that. Well, who else has benefited from the scheme, Deputy Speaker? Well, if you have a look at the submission of the department to the Senate inquiry into this scheme, Deputy Speaker, you see that over 41% of total redundancy payments made have been paid to employees in the manufacturing industry. Well, you've got to ask yourself, Deputy Speaker, why does the government hate workers in the manufacturing industry so much? What is it that they've got against workers in the manufacturing industry? I see the member for Wakefield in the chamber today, and he's got a keen interest in this issue, and I see the member for Hotham in the chamber today, and she's got a keen interest in this issue as well. They are members who've stood up in defence of the manufacturing industry in their electorate, as has the member for Blair, who's also in the and the member for Hunter is in the chamber today. They have been willing to stand up. In fact, one of the most passionate speeches that I saw by a member in this parliament, in the 44th parliament, was the speech by the member for Wakefield, imploring the government not to chase the automotive industry offshore. So against that background, Deputy Speaker, and knowing that the single biggest group of workers who have benefited under the FEG scheme, over 41% of workers who have benefited are workers in the manufacturing industry, you've got to ask yourself, why does this government hate them so much? Why does this government hate them so much, chasing their jobs offshore and then the first opportunity it gets, it seeks to reduce their rights and entitlements and the benefits that could be payable for them under a scheme that has worked for close to a decade. We should reject the bill, Deputy Speaker. It's not fair, it's not right, and we'll be voting against it.